This is the new Leica SL3-P, a workhorse powerhouse camera that does incredibly well in both photo and video, and is actually a good bridge between the SL3-S and the SL3. And to be frank, I've been fairly critical of the SL series in general for a long time now, but after using this for a few days, did it change my mind? Let's talk about it. So this camera is a sample. I don't get to keep it. I don't get anything from Leica other than early access to this camera. But as a big fan of the brand, I want to give them a thanks for sending it out early. But since this video doesn't have a sponsor, the best thing you could do would be to subscribe to this channel to see more things like this. Now, right off the bat, you will be able to see that this camera does look really similar and then slightly different to the other SL lineup cameras. I'm actually surprised because this is getting the P branding, which is usually more like the professional. It's more of like a special edition of a normal like M camera or a Q camera. Usually that comes with a script on the top plate. This obviously does not do that, but we definitely have removed the red dot. There's no even space for a dot there. And then we have the Leica branding here. To be honest, I thought this would probably come across in black, so it would be all blacked out. It might be something that I would consider doing, but I do think that this just looks really nice, really clean. But it is one of the things that has thrown me off a little bit about the SL series in general, is that you have this really just modern and blocky looking Leica text right here. And then right next to it, you have the script logo. Those things have always thrown me off a little bit. So I love the clean aesthetic of this camera just being all blacked out. So just like small distinctions that make this camera look a little bit more subtle and just a lot cleaner to my eye, at least. Now, I mentioned that this kind of bridges the gap between the SL3S and the SL3. The SL3S has a 24 megapixel sensor. It is much more of like a faster camera. It has a lot of really great video specs, things like that. And then the SL3 is like the image resolution monster. It has like a 60 megapixel sensor. Just really good image quality. But for most people, they have to kind of choose between one of the two. Most people aren't going to be able to purchase both a 24 megapixel and a 60 megapixel sensored camera. But that's where this thing comes in. It has a lot of newer tech for Leica, at least. It's really fast, has a lot of really great video specs that we'll obviously get into in a little bit. And it has a 45 megapixel sensor. And frankly, out of all of the SL cameras, if I was going to jump into the system, this is absolutely the camera that I would be picking up. So while this thing isn't like a speed demon in the way that something like the Alpha 9 III is, you know, it can't do 120 photos per second with a global shutter. This thing has a backsided illuminated sensor that actually can pump out some respectable stats in terms of higher frame rates. It will do 40 frames a second in a burst of up to 70 frames. So you're getting almost 2 seconds or so of a burst at 40 frames a second. This does obviously kick that down to an electronic shutter, and it also drops the bit rate from 14 bits to 12 bits. And I will say that for like fast action, like high performing sports stuff, I probably wouldn't use it for things like golf, for things like baseball. I just had my son in the backyard who is obsessed with baseball just give me a few swings with a plastic bat. And while it looks like he is warping the plastic bat, that's just from the electronic shutter, not being able to read out at a full speed. So could you shoot sports with this for your kid's baseball game? Absolutely. Will you see some rolling shutter issues? Absolutely. But still having the ability to do it, I would rather have the ability to shoot at faster frame rates like that than to not. Unless I'm specifically trying to do something where I'm turning, you know, like a set of photos into a video, I'm not needing a bunch of burst rates. And frankly, I usually don't even do burst rates other than those specific use cases when I'm doing non-sports photography. I will say that while the processor is really good, and we'll get to autofocus in a bit, which has been one of my main critiques of the SL system in general, I do wish the buffer would offload images to the card a little bit faster. But I'm used to, you know, cameras that could do 30 frames a second unlimited. And in all of the burst modes with electronic shutter, you're limited to 70 photos total. And then obviously, once you do that, you do have to wait for it to offload to the card. So it's just one of those things that where if you're really doing a lot of burst modes and a lot of things like that, you might end up missing images as you're waiting for the camera to buffer. But again, you're probably going to want like a more dedicated sports and action camera if that's going to be the thing that you're really looking for. Now to autofocus, I know I have this manual focus lens on here. The only Leica branded lens that I have currently that they sent along with this camera is their 24-70 f2.8. And I do believe that this is like a really well-performing lens in terms of autofocus. And I did a bunch of bursts of like my kid just running in the backyard and sprinting back and forth. And I think the hit rate was more than acceptable. And I've done a few other tests with some of the other L-mount autofocus lenses that I have. And while I'm sure autofocus performance is going to be best on, Leica glass with Leica cameras, I found the hit rate to be really, really, really good. And to be fair, I haven't spent a lot of time with the other SL3 systems here. This is supposed to be the best focusing of the SL3 cameras that they have, which I'm assuming is going to be the best autofocusing camera that they do have. And my only gripe about this, because the way that it tracks subjects is great. I haven't had no issues, and I think that I could absolutely be very confident in going to a wedding or something like that with this camera and not feeling like I was wrestling with it in any way. So as far as if you were going to say, hey, Benj, we're just going to like get rid of your entire wedding kit and you're going to have a Leica SL3-P for all of your autofocus needs, I would be very, very happy with the performance, and it wouldn't be something that I think would hinder my work in any way, which again, I could not say that that was the case for the original SL series or any of the SL2 cameras. At least with the way that I use tracking autofocus, I found these to be really, really good. And from this camera forward, I'm assuming this is basically dropping any autofocus issues that I have, albeit one particular thing that I've gotten used to in other systems that this camera doesn't have. And it's something I mentioned in my last video about the Lumix L10, is it does not have an auto subject recognition setting. I really wish that more cameras would do this. I know that I'm just used to that in my other cameras. So I had to map this back button to be just like a subject recognition thing. And it's basically just for when I'm 99% of the time, I guess 95% of the time, doing photos of people. And so I don't really have to change it. That doesn't become an issue, and it tracks the person that I'm looking for really well. But there's a lot of times where I'm doing like image testing, or I'm doing product photos or things of like a landscape or something that's other than a person. And it just struggles when it's trying to find a person, obviously, and there's no person in the scene. So I have to switch it back in the AF detection mode from a human to just having that be off. And then it does a pretty decent job tracking a subject or whatever I want out of something. It's not perfect, and it's not as sticky as some of my other cameras, but like that whole time right there, that I was moving back and forth at pretty close to minimum focusing distance on this manual focusing lens, it performed really well. So it's not as sticky on an object as some of the other cameras I have, but as far as like, if it nails the subject that I'm telling it to actually focus on, as far as like a person, I haven't had any issues. So it's more of just a nitpick about the way that I specifically use autofocusing systems. Now, the thing about this camera is that it is just like a perfect mix of all of the other Leica cameras, and then it also builds a little bit beyond that. So this is probably Leica's best video camera to date. It has a high enough resolution sensor that you can do 8K. You can do 8K open gate. I found myself using the 6K open gate settings quite a bit, and I brought it to a wedding that I was actually just doing video on. So while I don't have a bunch of image samples from the wedding in photography, I actually have a lot of image samples from the video that I was shooting. I do love that it has a dedicated video and like cinema mode. So you have the opportunity to use things like shutter angle, which just makes switching between frame rates a lot easier. And also the way I had this set up is I have specific video profiles. So I had a 6.4K open gate mode at 23.98 frames per second, a 4K mode at 120 frames a second, which I love when cameras are able to do that. And then I also shot a lot in 6K 60p in 16:9 mode. And while this camera does have some rolling shutter performance issues, when I'm doing wedding stuff, I'm not doing a bunch of whip pans or anything like that. And to be frank, basically the hardest thing that I could do would be like the low light stuff on a dance floor, and it's gonna be the most time I'm getting motion blur and things. A lot of these shots were done on the dance floor, and you can see a lot of how the image is performing here, how well the focusing is doing. I'm shooting this at like 3200 ISO with just like a small little Harlow light that I'm holding off to the side for a little bit of fill. So overall, this thing has just like a ridiculous amount of video options and frame rates, and again, makes this kind of the perfect hybrid camera for a Leica SL3 style owner. And I will say that one of the things about these cameras that can do so many different video modes is that you can really get into the weeds of all of the different options, and it can be really overwhelming. And I think that the thing that Leica does almost better than anything in their cameras is just their menu systems. They've really perfected this in this camera at least, and I'm assuming it is going to be in the other cameras. And what can be really overwhelming for a camera like this is just having to pair all of the frame rates along with the resolutions, along with the aspect ratios, along with the bit rates. And they've made a really great menu system here where you can just select either like your sensor format, so 35mm, or you want to do just the open gate 3x2 files, or you want to do just things in 120 frames a second or 24 frames a second. And what it'll do is it'll go down and filter out all the other options. So you're not just scrolling through a bunch of stuff that you can't use. It just filters those things out and shows you how many options you have per different category that you're going through. It's like you're just searching for something on B&H or a website where you're just picking all of those different parameters that you want, and it's showing you what's available in that. And I think that the system here made it so easy. I sat down for like less than 5 minutes and chose a few different modes and was able to build out profiles for those modes so that I could just easily switch between them. And if you never used an SL series camera, one of the brilliant things that they've done is the ability to just hold, like long press down on any of the buttons, and it'll automatically bring up the menu setting to go like, do you want to remap this button to something else? So I don't have to go into the customize controls menu. I can just hold down one of these buttons and just say, I want this to be my video profile setting. I want this to be my ISO setting. I want this to be my AF detection setting. And so it just makes setting up a camera like this so much easier than digging through all the menus. The menus on these cameras are great. And then just the implementation of being able to customize the cameras as well is also really great. The other thing, again, if you haven't used an SL series camera before, is that these things are absolute tanks. It almost feels, and this is gonna sound like a downside, I'm gonna be honest. It does sound like a downside, but it almost feels like a medium format camera. It almost feels like a Hasselblad X2D2 or something like that. And I say that as like a compliment to this camera because those cameras are really well made. This camera feels the same. It's an absolute brick, an absolute tank. And this isn't meant necessarily to be as much of like an everyday camera. Obviously, you can put something like an M lens on here and it can be like a camera that you can carry with you. But as you can see, like I don't need to add another grip to this. My fingers, which I don't have like the largest hands in the world, but like most Sony cameras, most Nikon cameras, most Canon cameras, my pinky will hang off the bottom of all of them. This camera fits great. I don't need an additional grip for it. It just works great. So the cameras are just super robust, and they're the only cameras out there that are really giving you like a specific weather rating. These things are IP54 weather rated. It gives you so much peace of mind that these cameras are expensive. They are not cheap by any means. Knowing that Leica does a really good job with its tolerances, all that kind of stuff, it just makes you feel a lot more at ease about really taking this camera into the field and using it as like a workhorse, get stuff done style camera. Now, I will say that the only elephant in the room with this is that if we're looking at specs and we pay attention to the industry at all, like I do is obviously part of my job here, this seems like a lot like the Lumix S1R II. Seems like the sensor's pretty similar. Seems like the video specs are pretty similar. This does have a few different things, like it has more autofocus points and things like that. Obviously, these cameras are much better built as well. The experience is much better. The menu systems are much better, but as far as like the internal sensor seems to be at least from a similar wafer of some sorts or whatever. They probably aren't taking the exact same sensor, like Leica's probably tweaking it to their own specifications and things, but it seems like, you know, pixel pitch, things like that are probably pretty similar. Obviously, I don't have any specific information about this, but Leica and Lumix have been kind of putting out similar cameras at times. And just as far as the pricing goes, the Lumix is going to be about half the price of this camera, maybe even less when the camera goes on sale. So as far as like a value proposition thing, obviously this is going to be better built. It's going to feel better. The experience is going to be better, all those kind of things. So if you're making like a better value play, I think that obviously the Lumix probably makes more sense. But if you want like the Leica branding, the Leica prestige, the Leica soul of all this kind of stuff, despite the specs and like the internal things looking really, really similar. So let me know what you think about this camera in the comments down below. I think that they've done a really good job of bridging, again, the two SL series from the SL3-S to the SL3. This fits right in the middle. All of my 35mm autofocus cameras, I'm expecting to do video. I think that this gives you a ton of really, really amazing video options. I love being able to shoot an open gate. And while this camera is not necessarily inexpensive by any means, I don't think that when you're thinking of Leica, you're thinking of inexpensive and necessarily like a value for money play in the same way as trying to just get the highest specs for the lowest amount of money. You're buying this because you love the heritage, you love the build quality, you love the feel, you love the experience, you love the menus, all of those different things. And I think this camera does all of those really, really well. So thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out my Leica playlist up here and then check out another video YouTube thanks to Leica up here, and I'll see you in one of those.